So justifying my support for the bill, what I'll give you is a sort of background to why I think this is a very timely bill. So, we know that cancer is extremely common. It affects 1 in 3 patients, adults, in a lifetime. And for most cancers that present late, these diseases have to be treated with drugs. And the drugs very often don't have the capacity to cure the cancers. These are treatments which we term palliative. The treatments may not have very high levels of efficacy, of activity. And as a consequence, patients will be exposed, obviously, to side effects, as we've heard, without necessarily the likelihood of benefit. There are some drugs, for example, that we use as standard treatments within the NHS that have response rates. These are the percentages of patients who will have a shrinkage of the cancer where that rate is 8%, okay, between 4 and 8%. And so the vast majority of patients are not going to necessarily have a shrinkage of the cancer or even gain, in some instances, symptom control. They'll be poisoned and the drug will be futile. And this raises a whole other area of innovation that we need to be exploring, which is not just giving drugs to patients that we think are going to be active or not, but actually exploring ways in which we can predict whether a drug is going to work or not. And this is the area of personalised medicine, and one of the more exciting areas that we're seeing in cancer drug discovery and development. So in a disease such as mesothelioma, which I treat, which is a rare cancer, when we do give chemotherapy, and we only have one chemotherapy we can give, that chemotherapy will perhaps extend the suppression of the disease duration by about 3 months. So patients will get 3 months of benefit from that and may survive only a year with that treatment. Now, that's a standard therapy. We can give that to all patients, of which maybe a fifth of patients won't even benefit. But what happens then? When those patients relapse and their cancer grows again, we have no standard treatments we can offer. Now, we're in the wake of a revolution in cancer drug discovery and cancer research, and we are now seeing approvals of drugs that are very active in specific genetic contexts. We know that cancer is a genetic disease, and if we see a mutation, there are drugs which can target those mutations very effectively. With the technology that allows us within rare cancers now to identify some of these mutations, there becomes this opportunity to explore the use of these active drugs that are perhaps licensed in the more common cancers in these rarer diseases. And so by exploiting genetics in rare disease, we have new opportunities emerging. And this is somewhere where the bill could be exercised in practice. Of course, using a drug that happens to be used in melanoma for mesothelioma because there's a common gene, a decision to do that should be based on good science and with good consultation. It shouldn't be done recklessly. But I think that in order to really accelerate what is, in the case of mesothelioma, actually a cancer that is growing in incidence, we're currently in the wake of an epidemic of this disease. It's only going to become more common. We really do need to accelerate the developments and treatments that are available. And so I think this bill will serve as a fantastic platform for enabling that.
And if I can ask you, I suppose I'm interested in the idea that we already have clinical trials that are in place. What's the difference, though, between what's the difference that this bill would add as opposed to the normal processes that we already have within cancer treatment and indeed within medicine?
So again, I'll take mesothelioma as an example because the vast majority of trials that have been developed for this disease are being developed around standard of care. So the idea is if you have a new drug, perhaps you can add it to existing standard of care, but it still leaves a vacuum after that standard of care has been completed. And so when patients, as they will, relapse, they have no options at all. Okay, there are no standards that can be exercised. I think the other problem with clinical trials, potentially the randomized, the large studies, that paradigm that we all work with in terms of defining efficacy, requires randomization. So patients very often will be randomized to receive a new drug or not receive a new drug. What happens to those individuals at progression? Sometimes we can do what is called a crossover, but if we're doing a large trial that's ever going to have a hope of getting a drug to license, these things aren't allowed because it affects the endpoint, it affects the result of the trial. And so with the sort of innovations that we're seeing in the ability of drugs to target specific genetics very effectively, where the activities are actually remarkable in some instances, and we can see very exciting, very encouraging responses to some of these targeted drugs. One of the questions that are being raised, and in fact, in the US recently with a drug in lung cancer, a license was passed without the need for a randomized trial because the drug was so effective. And I think we're going to see more and more of these opportunities arising. And there are debates about the way in which we, try and pass effective therapy. Do we have to wait for the large international, randomized study that takes years? Or can we have a very, very strong efficacy signal in a small number of patients that gives us sufficient confidence this is an active drug with low toxicity and the patient should get it now?